Hey guys, this is Ben Hansen from the TV show Fact or Faked on the Sci-Fi Channel. Our show takes a look at a lot of videos and photos to try and determine if they're real or not. We also interview a lot of witnesses to see if they're telling the truth. Recently, a lot of people have been asking me about an interview that was done by Jimmy Kimmel. He interviewed former President Bill Clinton on his TV show and asked him about the topic of UFOs and aliens to see if Clinton had actually asked about the files, inquired, and what he had done when he was president. The big question on everyone's mind, of course, is whether Bill Clinton was telling the truth or if he was withholding information. So I noticed that a lot of people were talking about the event, but not much analysis had been done on the actual interview. We use a lot of different deception detection techniques in our television show, but today we're going to be primarily focused on nonverbal communications. Before doing so, I wanted to talk a little bit about my background. I have degrees in the behavioral sciences, sociology, criminology. I spent several years investigating state-level investigations, primarily child sex crimes and white-collar crimes. I also worked for a time in federal law enforcement. Currently, I travel the world lecturing on various subjects, including profiling hoaxers. I'd like to point out that the opinions I express are my own, and they don't in any way represent the views of any agency or former employer of mine. I also wasn't paid or compensated for the analysis. I don't consider myself an expert in the field of nonverbal communication or the other techniques used in this interpretation. I've never conducted academic research on the subject, written a book, or received advanced degrees in the study. I will add that my background includes interviewing thousands of witnesses, victims, and perpetrators of very heinous crimes, and I think I've developed a talent at reading people. My personal interest in deception detection goes far beyond that which I received in basic and advanced training in my former career. So, I think I'm generally more experienced and knowledgeable than the everyday person on the subject, but it's important to remember that deception detection is a long ways from being considered an exact science. There's no one gesture, behavior, or sign that someone is lying. Instead, what we might get are several red flags that we take into account as a cumulative total. Sometimes we can make inferences as to the probability that a person is being truthful, or maybe they find certain topics very stressful. This could indicate that they feel constrained in their answers, and they're preoccupied with trying not to provide too much information. Lies also are not just limited to false statements, but also diversions and omissions of the complete truth. So I'd encourage you to watch the full analysis and not just focus on one or two red flags. I'd also encourage you to do your own research. Go directly to the original studies on deception detection, and don't just take my word for it. As I stated, I'm not an expert in the field. Instead, I've compiled the knowledge of those who are experts. I leave it to you to determine if there's merit to my opinion. At the very least, if you stay with the video to the end, you might just gain a new perspective of the interview that Jimmy Kimmel did with President Clinton. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's get started. One thing that first caught my attention was President Clinton's reaction to Kimmel right before they took a commercial break. Kimmel said that when he returned, he would ask him about UFOs.
We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, I hope you will indulge me in something, because I want to ask you about your access to the files on the UFOs. Okay? President Clinton is here with us. We'll be right back.
This strikes me as a bit over the top. It's as if Clinton found Kimmel to be overly hilarious and entertaining. He throws back his head, his hands come off the chair. Although I find Kimmel funny, and they're probably having a good time, in reality, the UFO alien subject has been viewed as a quite serious subject by the Clintons. According to some, there's been no other president that has publicly acknowledged more inquiry into the subject than Bill Clinton. There's also numerous stories surrounding his and Hillary's interest, including some where he's previously acknowledged sending delegated staff to look into the records. An interesting side note is that during the grand jury hearing with the Whitewater and Monica Lewinsky scandals, a subpoena was issued to turn over a book about phone sex which Lewinsky gave Clinton. The book was located in Clinton's private study, right between a book about Churchill and a book entitled UFO Crash at Roswell. So while most politicians are known to have the ability to turn on their acting skills to fake enthusiasm, this kind of struck me as particularly cheesy. Kimmel actually announced in his show 2 days prior to the interview that he would be asking the former president about UFOs. So you better believe that Clinton came prepared to answer questions on the subject, and he had several days to do so. That's why, although this reaction is kind of subtle, there's several other reactions we're going to look at that are particularly interesting. We're not witnessing a spontaneous interview where Kimmel lays down some difficult questions that catch a president off guard. He's had time to prepare for this. If any incongruent actions are observed, it would tend to indicate that the emotions held in check would leak through even more poignantly had he not been given time to prepare. So this jovial, enthusiastic Bill gives me the impression of someone who may have a little nervous anticipation. It doesn't seem quite genuine. A degree of energy maybe, applauding, smiling, chuckling, that wouldn't be out of place, but this is a little bit exaggerated. It's typical of someone who wants to appear at ease, but really isn't. Here's an example of what I consider a genuine reaction by Clinton to a spontaneous comment that was an appropriately measured response.
Yeah, one of the few things I miss about this diet is I loved hard cheese. I like, hard cheddar cheese and Swiss cheese, and I miss that.
Yeah.
But I feel a lot better.
Which do you miss more, being president or cheese?
Well, I like being president more than I like cheese.
Yeah, interesting.
That's a more typical response that I'd expect, and it's how he normally behaves throughout the rest of the interview, until we get to the part coming up. In an effort to conceal real stress or nervousness, it's not uncommon for people to overdo the perception of being comfortable by stretching or yawning as if they're bored, or they go the other way and they crack jokes and they come off overly extroverted and happy. This segment with the cheese comment came at the beginning of the interview. Now we're going to jump forward back to where we were right before the commercial break. Now as we come back, you're going to see that Clinton kind of gives a little presidential thumbs up to the band, or his approval of Kimmel. We're not quite sure which, but there does seem to be a switch in his composure from this point forward as Kimmel gets into the UFO topic.
Hello, we're back. Manny Pacquiao's on the way. President Bill Clinton is here with us. So if I was president, and I won't be, let's be honest, the first thing I would do after putting my hand on that Bible and taking that oath to serve the country is I wouldn't even probably finish the oath. I would run to the White House. I demand to see all the classified files on the UFOs. Because I want to know. I'd want to know what has been going on. Did you do that?
Sort of.
Sort of.
The first thing we observe is that Bill is intently focused on Kimmel, who just a moment ago had him laughing about cheese, and again when he said he was going to ask about UFO files, but now Clinton is quite serious. Kimmel makes fun of himself, saying he'd never be able to be president, and Clinton doesn't bat an eye. Instead, we see him swallow several times, press his lips together, and move his tongue around in the inside of his cheek a few times. Increased swallowing can be an indicator of stress, either from anticipation of being caught in deception or nervousness about the interview process in general. The tongue against the inside of the cheek is often associated with thinking and uncertainty. One other interpretation is that it can sometimes indicate contempt, a sort of satisfaction that someone feels when they deceive another. Known as duper's delight, the feeling expressed is similar to the secret pleasure someone gets when duping or deceiving someone. Personally, I'd go with the first interpretation in this case. There's too little information at this point to indicate deception, but it does appear that he's starting to lose confidence. We also hear him respond saying, sort of. This is called a qualifier or an extraneous phrase. Phrases like sort of, kind of, I believe, I think, they all show a lack of focused conviction. The answer should be pretty clear. Yes, I demanded to see all the classified files, or no, I didn't. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between, but Kimmel picks up on this vagueness and repeats his phrase back to him. Then Clinton starts into a more detailed explanation.
Did you do that?
Sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah, we had, I think it was at the beginning of my second term, we had the anniversary of Roswell.
I wouldn't consider this the most significant example, but this is where Clinton starts to do what I call backing out of the dead-end alley. It's also called the mid-sentence jump. The speaker will start talking about one topic, and then sometimes midway through the sentence, they start to become muddled, not making sense. They stop themselves, they restart, they fail to finish the thought, or they change the subject completely. When someone isn't being completely truthful, we also often see an increase in stuttering or stammering. We see very little of this with Clinton during the whole interview until we get to the alien topic.
Yeah, we had, I think it was at the beginning of my second term, we had the anniversary of Roswell.
You waited that long?
I did.
Wow.
Well, I didn't. And then there's also Area 51. You remember there was a great sci-fi movie where there was an alien kept deep under the ground in Area 51? So first I had people go look at the records on Area 51 to make sure there was no alien down there.
Did you catch that? Not many people notice that right after he answers Kimmel in the affirmative, he slips in a complete denial.
You waited that long?
I did.
Wow.
Well, I didn't. And then
Now we have three interesting flags in one sentence. Clinton starts by stuttering, offers a complete contradictory statement to his previous one, and then backs out of the dead-end alley by changing subjects completely. Why would he offer denial and slip it in so quickly without qualifying the statement? To understand how Bill Clinton might convey deception, we should look back at a time when we have confirmed evidence of him telling a lie. When Bill was questioned in the Monica Lewinsky scandal, he was very careful with his words. He has a habit of responding very literally. When he started to feel the weight and guilt of the affair, lying to the American public, there arose sort of a cognitive dissonance, and he attempted to resolve it through rationalizing. The idea was if he could find a way to manipulate semantics so he could answer in a manner that he felt was somewhat truthful by his definition, then he could escape being found out and convicted of perjury. When it was learned that he did have a sexual relationship with Lewinsky, he said that he didn't consider certain acts with private body parts as a sexual relationship if he was the receiver and not the doer of the act. He asked the prosecution to narrowly define what they're looking for. So he would say things such as, that depends on what the definition of a sexual relationship is. So although he still lied, he felt he could more comfortably live with it if in his mind most of it was technically accurate. Remember, this is the same man who says he didn't technically smoke marijuana because he didn't inhale. Clinton's a spin doctor. So here he tells Kimmel that he waited until his second term before he looked into the UFO subject, but then right away he sneaks in a retraction and begins talking about Area 51. Maybe he wanted to be more technically accurate by correcting himself because the Area 51 inquiry could have happened before the Roswell inquiry. We really don't know what he meant by, I didn't wait until my second term to ask about Roswell. It was earlier. I asked about something else first. I didn't ask at all. The most curious thing about the retraction is that he slips in the phrase and then rushes past it. He starts to say something else, changes his mind, and then goes on talking about the movie Independence Day. Regardless of what he meant by it, Bill's having some trouble with keeping the chronology straight. Deceivers and those in very stressful conversation often have trouble telling events in the right order. It could be that the events are made up, or it could be the events are true, but there's often more to them that they aren't sharing. So, not to be too hard on the president, because we all make mistakes in telling a story, but remember, he had a few days to prepare for this exact question. What did you do to look at the UFO files? And this isn't the first time he's answered this in public. In 2005 in Hong Kong, he gave a more formal interview. This may have created the difference. I find it likely that he is telling the truth regarding his inquiries into Roswell and Area 51, but there's also a good chance there were further and deeper inquiries into the UFO alien subject, which he may have been on the verge of sharing with Kimmel's audience, but then he thought better of it. If he had made other inquiries, this could explain why he's having trouble keeping the timeline completely straight. So let's move on.
So first I had people go look at the records on Area 51 to make sure there was no alien down there. And people thought that because everybody who works there has to stop about an hour away and put on special clothing and then drive in and out. And that's because a lot of our stealth technology is made there. We know that now, but there are no aliens there.
I'm confused. What is he actually talking about here? People thought there were aliens at Area 51 because everyone there has to stop an hour away and put on special clothing. I've researched a fair deal about the legends of Area 51, and this is the first time I've heard of people putting on special clothing to work there. Just to make sure I hadn't missed a key element of the Area 51 lore, I asked George Knapp, the Vegas reporter most central to breaking the story of the base's existence. I also asked several other well-known UFO researchers. None of them recalls a detail about workers putting on special clothing. Yet Clinton states that this is why people thought aliens were being kept there underground. When someone is deceiving, they may have a tendency to offer superfluous details and explanations that are not asked for. They also may give premature explanations for actions or opinions. Bill jumps right into explaining why people thought there were aliens at the base. Remember, he's the one that brings up the base in the first place. Granted, this is a talk show interview and not a deposition, so guests are encouraged to be far more chatty and open-ended, but it kind of seems like Clinton may be repeating information he acquired that wasn't public common knowledge. We see evidence of this when he backs out of another dead-end alley. Notice his stammering and how he again stops himself mid-sentence and doesn't finish where he was going.
And that's because a lot of our stealth technology is made there. We know that now, but there are no aliens there.
What else was he about to say? The whole statement is confusing and out of place. The facts may even very well be true, but often when people start concealing information, they begin talking and giving explanations for anything in an effort to fill the silence. In trying to avoid that deer in the headlights look, their answers become muddled or they say more than they wanted. At this point, Clinton goes back to the Roswell subject.
So then when the Roswell thing came up, I knew we'd get, gazillions of letters. So I had all the Roswell papers reviewed, everything.
Now this example isn't as significant as the previous two, but we do see some mid-sentence jumping. Then he very clearly states that he had all the Roswell papers reviewed. Notice what he's doing with his head.
So I had all the Roswell papers reviewed, everything.
He's shaking his head no at the exact same time he's saying everything. Now this could be interpreted in a few different ways. Does it mean, no, he didn't find any evidence of a cover-up in the papers? Does it mean he's displaying his disgust with the results of the review? Or maybe he didn't have all the papers reviewed despite what he told Kimmel. The incongruency between what he's verbalizing and what his body is saying is really important. In this instance, though, we can't really figure out why he's shaking his head, but we can say for certain this statement really has no intrinsic value. What information did he actually provide? Remembering how Clinton has been known to play word games, when he says he had all the papers reviewed, can we be certain we know what he means? This is really important. He never actually says they didn't find anything which supports the UFO or alien theory. He only shakes his head no, and then Kimmel asks the next question. It's possible Clinton would have given a verbal reply of no instead of just shaking his head if Kimmel had pressed him, but we look for deception. We still need to be particularly aware of indirect statements and possible attempts to avoid answering the original inquiry. Additionally, Clinton only said they reviewed papers. There was no mention of demanding to see the wreckage material, photographs, or other physical evidence. In a case revolving around physical evidence, why would you not ask to see what was purported to be the wreckage? Maybe he did ask, but he's never disclosed it in public. Equally interesting is that in May of 1995, at the request of Congress, the General Accounting Office provided their 27-page report, which concluded that all the records from the Roswell base in the summer of 1947 had been destroyed. There were no documents. According to the GAO, there were no papers to review. So this begs the question, what does Clinton mean by saying they had all the papers reviewed? Now we move to the last segment of the interview, where you're going to see a significant change in the demeanor of the former president when compared to the first part of the questioning. With the difficult questions behind him, you're suddenly going to see a lighter, more relaxed Bill, who feels comfortable in his element and even jokes around. Let's go back for a second and look at the way Clinton has been sitting the entire interview portion when we got into the UFO subject. You see that right here when they came back from commercial, Clinton has stopped applauding and Kimmel starts with the first question. Now you see that Clinton had been sitting with both feet flat on the floor, but as Kimmel starts to talk, he crosses his legs, shifts in his seat, and gets a better grip on the arms of the chair. Although it's very common for people to cross their legs while sitting, protecting the abdomen by folding the arms or legs can be a sign of closed-mindedness, defensiveness, and attempts to conceal information. This becomes especially true when we combine it with all the other gestures we're seeing. Now we're not going to go over the whole segment again, But if you replay parts of it, you can see that Clinton's right hand stays practically glued to the right arm of the chair. It only leaves to gesture twice. This is a departure from practically every other part of the interview where he's talking about things such as his love for cheese, his charities, etc. Nearly everywhere else, he uses his right hand just as much as the left, or uses both hands together as he talks. One red flag we see with people concealing the truth is they often minimize their hand gestures and start to become very rigid. Some people even grab their own wrist to keep it from moving. Guilty or apprehensive people are overly concerned that their hands will give them away if they start fidgeting or don't know where to put them, so they tend to anchor them down so they won't move. One other thing we can go back and look at is an increase in jaw clenching. While Clinton does seem to flex his jaw at times during the whole interview, we can see that the action increases during the questioning about UFO and alien subjects. Again, this could be a sign of stress, and flexing for some people is kind of a soothing behavior to release attention. It also can mean frustration. In a few parts of the interview, he juts out his lower jaw coupled with the lips pressed tightly together. It happens rather quickly, but almost always indicates a negative emotion. Many times it's like the jaw flex and it's done as a soothing gesture. The timing of it is important. He does it the first of the UFO questions, which we just saw, and then exactly when he tells Kimmel that he waited until his second term to ask about Roswell. Then again, right after he says he had people look at the records to make sure there wasn't an alien at Area 51. Then again, very strongly after he had all the Roswell papers reviewed. All of this brings us up to the point where Kimmel asks if Clinton would tell the American public about aliens if he knew.
If you saw that there were aliens there, would you tell us?
Yeah.
You would?
I would.
Even though it sounds like a guy in the audience is yelling that he's a liar, this is possibly the most difficult segment of the interview to analyze. My opinion is that Clinton is most clearly expressing some tension, perhaps apprehension, but it's almost impossible to determine why, or if he's being untruthful. In the first place, when Kimmel asks the question, and we're supposing the TV program that it was done in real time, Clinton answers almost immediately in the affirmative.
If you saw that there were aliens there, would you tell us?
Yeah.
You would?
Generally, we should be suspicious of answers which come immediately after the question. There's a certain optimum window of time for true responses. They shouldn't be too delayed, and they shouldn't come too quickly. This can indicate the response has been rehearsed or anticipated. We know that Clinton had a few days to prepare for the topic, so he more than likely did rehearse his answers, and could have very well been provided with a script of the questions that Kimmel would ask. It could also be argued that Clinton's conviction to tell the public really is genuine. Having thought about it frequently, he didn't need time to deliberate in his mind. So, in this case, a good argument could be made for both conclusions. We find an even more compelling observation when we look at the narrow scope of the question that Kimmel asks. Since we know Clinton likes to play word games and they were just talking about Roswell, when Kimmel says, "If you saw that there were aliens there, would you tell us?" Technically, the question only pertains to Roswell and if Clinton actually saw aliens. If he saw document or photo evidence, held extraterrestrial UFO debris in his own hands, or spoke to people who confirmed that it really happened, he could keep it from the public and still be technically telling the truth to Kimmel with this question. If this is the rationalization that Clinton uses, he'd also feel less anxiety about answering. But what does his body language say?
Would you tell us?
Yeah.
You would?
I would.
Clinton has been listening and looking at Kimmel as he asks his questions, but the very second that Jimmy finishes asking him if he would tell us about aliens if he saw them, Clinton looks away and closes his eyes at the same time he replies, "Yeah." It happened so fast that maybe even Kimmel didn't know he observed it, but I think he had a sense of the lack of conviction on Clinton's part, so for clarification, Kimmel asks him again, "You would." We all know that breaking off eye contact can be a sign of the subject who's experiencing an increasing level of distress. Closing the eyes can also indicate distress, or feeling another negative emotion that's too strong to handle. It's almost as if they are symbolically closing their eyes so they don't have to see the issue to confront it. So then what happens?
Yeah.
You would?
I would.
Clinton has the same response. He looks away from Kimmel, closes his eyes again, nods yes as he responds, "I would." Almost as if Kimmel still doesn't believe him, he repeats back, "You would." Did you also notice again the jaw flex? He does it twice, right after he answers Kimmel. We could speculate for hours why Clinton might be feeling distress or some aversion to this question. Maybe he promised someone he would never tell the American public, no matter what he may have seen or learned, in which case he just told Kimmel a lie and this created some feelings of guilt. Maybe he's feeling fear of the consequences to the public or himself if he were to tell the people what he knows. Maybe he really doesn't know anything about alien existence, but he's feeling frustrated about his failure to reveal a cover-up he thinks happened. The bottom line is we can see the effects of the distress, but we can't be inside his head to know why he's expressing it, because it could be any number of reasons. I talked about a shift in demeanor after Clinton finishes with the tough questions. This shift now becomes very evident as he talks about general facts regarding the universe.
Well, I think, look, what do we know? We know now we live in an ever-expanding universe. We know that there are billions of stars and planets literally out there, and the universe is getting bigger. We know from our fancy telescopes that just in the last 2 years, more than 20 planets have been identified outside our solar system that seem to be far enough away from their suns and dense enough that they might be able to support some form of life. So it makes it increasingly less likely that we're alone.
We notice quite easily that Bill's become far more polished and articulate. There's no more stammering, no more clinching or jutting out the jaw. He's taken that right hand off of the chair and he's actively using both hands for lots of gesturing. He's looking Kimmel in the eyes a much greater percentage of time than he was previously. This is a subject he's comfortable with. It's safe. He's not required to carefully dance around topics he has to back out of. His actions seem to communicate that he really does believe everything he's saying at this point. Jimmy's intently listening, and his clever reply results in a very interesting response from Clinton.
That they might be able to support some form of life. So it makes it increasingly less likely that we're alone.
Oh, you're trying to give me a hint that there are aliens.
No, I'm trying to tell you I don't know.
Oh.
Let's play that again for those who missed it, because it's pretty subtle, but it's definitely present and quite remarkable. I bet Clinton probably didn't even know he did it. It happened rather instinctually before he caught himself and began talking. Watch again. This time look for signs of incongruence.
Oh, you're trying to give me a hint that there are aliens.
No.
Did you catch it? I almost couldn't believe it when I first saw what Clinton did. He nods his head yes. He actually nods his head yes in response to Kimmel's question. You're trying to give me a hint that there are aliens. Clinton immediately nods yes and then quickly says no. And the jaw clenching has returned. Well, there's one other thing I want to point out, an even more subtle reaction, because some of the best indicators of tension are the most difficult to spot. Take a look at Clinton's left hand. As we already discussed, lack of hand gesturing can be an indicator of stress. His hands are back on the arms of the chair, completely motionless, until here.
Oh, you're trying to give me a hint that there are aliens.
A very convenient time to have a nerve twitch. When Kimmel says, "are," that there are aliens, the fingers on the left hand clench and slightly retract. It's almost as if he was shocked by the idea that Kimmel may think he's hiding the truth. Or maybe he's displaying a psychological reaction to the thought that aliens exist. Am I being hypercritical? Absolutely, because the answers are in the details. The take-home lesson is that Clinton's body is not telling the same story as his speech. We're back to uncomfortable Bill. As he nods yes, he's already turned his head away from Kimmel and he's back to shutting his eyes with the jaw flex. Kimmel's seemingly harmless question that was delivered as a joke has again knocked the former president out of his comfort zone. Even though Bill has a slight smile, he's obviously affected as we observe him taking several seconds to recover. People who feel insecurity, anxiety, or fear often have difficulty processing sarcasm. Clinton isn't laughing wholeheartedly at Jimmy's humor anymore. He's stopped looking at him. Now we're going to see him even interrupt Kimmel a few times and start to ramble as if Jimmy wasn't even there. The stammering speech will return and the mid-sentence jump makes another appearance.
No, I'm trying to tell you I don't know.
Oh.
But if we were visited someday, I wouldn't be surprised. I just hope that it's not like Independence Day.
Yeah, right.
That it's a conflict.
Well, now we have friendly
Maybe the only
aliens.
way to unite this incredibly divided world of ours. They're out there. We better think of how all the differences among people on Earth would seem small if we felt threatened by a space invader. That's the whole theory of independence.
You're right. You're right.
Everybody gets together and makes nice and,
Who knew that Bill Clinton was an admirer of Ronald Reagan? Reagan's speeches to the United Nations in 1987 and 88 contain almost the exact same phraseology regarding uniting against a common threat. Did the beginning of Clinton's soliloquy make any sense? Maybe he fell back to quoting Reagan and Independence Day because it was something he knew, and he could use it to get back on track and divert away from the stressful questioning. Along the way, his thoughts are very awkwardly verbalized. What was he starting to say? Was he speaking in the hypothetical or making a declaration?
maybe the only way to unite this incredibly divided world of ours. They're out there. We better.
So we can see him start to laugh again. He's now using both hands to gesture. He's back in his safe zone. At this point, the interview comes to an end.
You and Bill O'Reilly would be hiding in a bunker together.
Oh, Bill O'Reilly, he did every mean thing he ever said about me. I don't care. Look at that.
Our final observation involves the eyes. We've made comments on how Clinton turns his eyes away or closes them. The study of neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, can teach us even more by focusing on precisely where the eyes are looking. Without time to go into details of how it's believed to work, NLP studies have created a guide for what we call eye accessing cues. The technique is often quite accurate. Whenever we think about events that really happened, or use our imagination to think of events that our minds fabricate, people have a tendency to look in specific directions. This chart shows the direction most people look when remembering real visual or audible events as opposed to making them up. Most people look down when they are deeply involved in an emotional or kinesthetic recollection. And we also generally look down when we're having inner dialogue. In other words, talking to ourselves. Like everything else we've discussed, it's definitely not a foolproof method, but I've found that it greatly assists in interviewing. This chart depicts the direction a right-handed person would generally look if you were seeing them in front of you. Left-handed people generally display everything reversed from the right-handed people. Bill Clinton is left-handed. Additionally, Kimmel is seated to his left, and he's watching the audience too, so it's difficult to come to too many conclusions due to all the distractions. But if you go back and watch the video, however, we can see that Clinton spends a lot of time in his lower left quadrant, or our right. Given that he's left-handed, this could indicate that he's thinking about the emotional and kinesthetic aspects of the conversation. This would be consistent with UFO topics, which I think he really does care about. Looking at this quadrant doesn't really tell us that he's lying. More so, it supports the idea that he's affected by the discussion emotionally. It doesn't even necessarily mean it's a negative emotion, but when coupled with all the other red flags, it would tend to indicate that some topics are particularly stressful. As outlined in this video, we've seen Clinton display several possible emotions: anxiety, frustration, insecurity, protectiveness, and so on. So what do I believe about Clinton and his interview? What's my final thought? Well, I believe there's overwhelming evidence that Bill Clinton had moments of significant apprehension, stress, and guarded behavior during the Kimmel interview. There were several moments he started down a road and stopped himself in awkward ways, as if he was about to say something he shouldn't. I believe his subconscious leaked out a bit of truth through his body language, and he tried hard to conceal it. Do I believe he knows more about the UFO and alien subject than he lets on? I believe it's very possible. I also sense his actions were communicating frustration about finding answers. It's very difficult to know the exact source of the frustration. It could be that he genuinely did try to inquire, and the record would support this idea, but maybe he was stonewalled by the very people he went to for answers. He wouldn't be the first politician to try, but to come up empty-handed and with the feeling that he was being lied to. I find it most likely that the frustration stems from finding out enough. Enough that he was told not to ask for more. This is supported by the interview segments where he offered information that isn't public knowledge. Even if what he was told was inaccurate, when he restrained himself from going further, it demonstrates that he's had conversations with officials who clearly laid out what he was not to share. When asked whether he would tell the American people if he saw aliens, I'm not sold on his conviction that he would. It's very possible that he wasn't ever given evidence of extraterrestrial existence. Maybe he was. But I feel that it was at least alluded to. More importantly, he came to understand that it was his duty to leave the topic alone. Consequently, when Jimmy Kimmel asked Bill Clinton if he was trying to hint that aliens are real, while Clinton may have not had first knowledge of it, I believe hinting was exactly what he was doing. I find it probable that he knows enough to conceal some of his knowledge and efforts into his inquiries. He knows enough, as he puts it, that he wouldn't be surprised if we were visited someday. Thank you everyone for taking time to watch this video. I know it was really long, so I appreciate you staying around to the end. I might add some other things and analysis, so keep on the lookout for that. Your constructive comments are always welcome.